astronomy with our session on eclipsing binaries. The duration of this talk will be 40 minutes and will be followed by a brief Q&A session. Before we begin, we request you to keep certain points in mind. Please keep your mics on mute throughout the session, and for any query during the question answer session, you may only use the chat box. Our sun, a fiery giant in the solar system, which provides heat and light to flourish life. One can only marvel at its sheer magnitude. But what if such a beast had a sibling to rival its power? Could such a world of fantasy even exist? Here to answer such questions is Mr. Bhavesh Rajput, a bright student at Fergusson College, Pune. His soul dwells in the realm of astronomy. Some of his projects include building a 6-inch reflector telescope mirror, analysis of light curves of eclipsing binaries, and a project to study the effects of coronal mass ejections on the Earth's thermosphere. Mr. Rajput attended a 10-day winter school on radio astronomy, jointly organized by National Center for Radio Astrophysics, TIFR, and Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics, Pune. He also interned at Science Popularization Center of Ayuka, Pune. Some of his many achievements include being featured in Hindustan Times 30 Under 30 Young Scholars as astronomy influencer for aspiring students about astronomy and astrophysics, and winning the International Ambassador Award at the International Astronomy and Astrophysics Competition in 2019. He is currently working as a project intern at IIT Bombay. The aim of his project is to study various binary star systems and to create a Python package to analyze and visualize the same. I now request Mr. Rajput to take over from here and introduce us to the subject of eclipsing binaries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pallavi, for such a brilliant introduction. Let's start. Right. Okay, so eclipsing binaries are winking buddies actually. Now, why buddies? We will get to know in this talk. Why they help us a lot. Why they are our best helping friends when it comes to explore this cosmos. So, binaries are basically of many types, and we shall know how many types are there and what exactly they produce in the terms of parameters and in the terms of their astrophysical significance. So I would like to start this talk with a quote by Carl Sagan. The cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff. We are a way for the universe to know itself. The importance of this quote is a lot regarding this uh, talk and even regarding every single attempt of humans to know this universe. To know this universe in order to understand how we came here at the first place, or if you can say in the more practical basis, to make our normal daily lives easier. And one of the best examples is GPS, Wi-Fi. All these are MRI. All these are byproducts of the research from the astronomy or astrophysics. Now, binary stars. Binary stars are just simple as two gravitationally bound stars circling each other, orbiting each other. Now, not circling, I will just say orbiting each other around the common center of mass, which is specifically known as barycenter. Now, every single body in this universe results in a two-body system always. For example, sun and earth. Even sun isn't at the fixed point, like the barycenter is not at the center of the sun. It is a little bit shifted. It is a little bit near to the surface. Even sun wobbles a little. And let's say if we are not in this solar system, and let's say we are in some another solar system which is some light years away, and from there, from some planet by some good telescope and a CCD CCD photometer sensors, we are observing the sun. Now we will observe like the sun is basically wobbling. Like it is not remaining still. It is wobbling, and that gives us a really good what is it, really good approximation, or let's say really good assumption to take on that, okay, this pair of star, like this single piece of star, is not alone. Either there is some unseen companion like a star, or maybe some heavy planets. For example, in our case, maybe Jupiter and Saturn. So binary stars are important. Now, why? The question is why. And the question I will deal with it, its importance when it comes to explore the universe, to explore the cosmos. Now, imagine a single star, just lying there in some cosmos, and we are sitting here on Earth and observing it from a telescope, like photometrically observing it. Now, what we will get to know about it? Okay, we can take its brightness. Okay, and by taking its brightness and different filters, we can have an estimate of its effective temperature, so effective surface temperature. And by doing some tet etc more, we can have its distance modulus also. We can have approximate distance, how much that star is far away from us. But after that, what? We don't know anything about it. Okay, we can take its spectra. The spectra will give us a good analysis of what constituent it's have, like what elements it has. Either it is a main sequence star, like it has hydrogen, helium, etc., and lithium. But let's say other elements, for example, let's say some heavier elements, for example, potassium, iron, etc. And what about those stars? So we will get a good spectral classification of it, and we can use an HR diagram, basically an Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, a diagram which basically plots stars according to the surface temperature and according to their masses. So let's say we get a good spectral type and we have its effective temperature and we plot it somewhere. Okay, this star can be somewhere like that, and it will give us a good mass ratio. Okay, so this star is this. Okay, so this is this. Okay, but it's not effective because the area, the error area, the region of area will be great. We don't know where that star may lie specifically to that point, and approximations are not good. Basically, we try to get as much as precise as we can in any field, not only in astronomy and astrophysics, but in any field of physics, in biology, in chemistry. We tend to get precise, and there comes binary stars. Now, binary stars to the rescue. Why? Because approximately two-thirds of all stars which we see in this universe are technically in multiple systems. Either they are in binary, like two orbiting each other, or maybe in quadruple, maybe two and two. Like for example, a star here and a star here, they are orbiting each other, but like a little bit far away from this star. There, some are orbiting here also, and these two systems are orbiting each other, so that can be a quadruple system, and hence on and on and on and on. There can be many systems. But let's say we focus on this specific, let's say one specific system, which is two orbiting stars. By classical mechanics, we know, let's say if a body is there and another body is there, and let's say this body and this body, because of their gravitational attraction, they are orbiting each other. Now we know the force between these two bodies, F equals to gm1 m2 by r square. And we know, like, let's say if we take a relative orbit, in a relative orbit in the sense, let's say we fix this star and only this star is moving as compared with relevance to this star. Now we know, for example, a force vector will be inside to this star, like F equals to gm1 m2 by r square, and another vector will be outside, basically centripetal force vector, which will be mv square by r. Now, equating that, we can easily get the estimation of, and let's assume this is in a circular orbit. We can easily get an estimation of various factors. For example, mass, if there are two systems, and the radius of the orbit, etc., and many other things. But this not only finishes up here. This gives us a lot of parameters also. Generally, for the 11th, 12th, and first, second year physics, we generally learn that for a two-body system, the most important things are mass, radius, the force they are experiencing between each other, and mostly that it is, and the size of the bodies. But astronomy, or basically let's say celestial mechanics, doesn't ends up here. There are a lot of parameters which needs to be estimated. For example, the parameters such as inclination. Let's say if this is the plane of sky, and let's say this is a plane of sky, like this vertically fronting me, and let's say there is this orbiting system, and this orbiting system is not like completely like this printed on the sky. It will be some tilted or like completely like tilted by 90 degrees. So that is an estimation we need. That is a parameter we need to estimate. Another parameter for the which is mostly done for the is eccentric orbits, basically elliptical orbits, like orbits which have some ellipticity. So let's say uh, eccentricity, value of eccentricity, argument of Perry-Estron, that is a specific quantity again. And there are other things, for example, longitude of ascending node, that is another specific quantity again, parameter again, and go on and on and on. There are many parameters. Now, and of course for elliptical systems the parameters goes on, because when there is an elliptical system, some other parameters join, for example, what is it, semi-major axis, it will join us, and then period is of course there also, and eccentricity and omega, etc. These will go on and on. Now, another brilliant thing to for the eclipsing binary systems is that there are brilliant distance estimators. Once you are get hold of an eclipsing binary, or you can go to a good eclipsing binary system, and you observe it in many photometric bands. For example, UBV bands, which are Johnson bands, or Strontian bands. For example, UBV bands. In these bands, if you take these values, their brightnesses. For example, if there is a blue star, okay, a very hot star, so if you observe it in a blue filter, it will be brighter as compared to if you observe it in a red filter. So minusing them, like minusing the magnitudes, the apparent brightness in the filters we are observing, for example U minus red R, so U minus R give B minus R for blue and R, it gives us a specific quantity known as color index. And color index there is directly proportional to the effective temperatures, to the luminosity, and many other factors. Now, but the other thing which it estimates is the distance, that how much a star is far away from us, because brightness depends upon the distance from the observer. If there is a star which is very bright, very bright, and if it's very far away, it will appear as to as a dim, right? But if a star which is you know less bright, it's kind of a dim star, but it is nearer to us, it will appear to be as a white, as a bright star. So this distance dependence will give us a good estimation that how much far away is that eclipsing binary is. So here, like for example, the two orbiting galaxies around Milky Way, for example, Magellanic Clouds, large and small Magellanic Clouds, and Andromeda Galaxy and Perseus clusters, etc. These are their distances are again estimated using eclipsing binaries, and using eclipsing binaries as a standard candle set. Now, apart from this, the eclipsing binaries are brilliant, exotic astrophysical labs for scientists. Imagine a very hot or very active star orbiting another very active star, and they're very close to each other. And there is a point which is a specific point, also known as a Roche's radius, or Roche's what is it? You can say a Roche's boundary. Just like a Schwarzschild radius for the event horizon, the name is Roche's radius, and that is the same radius due to which we have an asteroid belt. Yeah, the sun also has a Roche's radius, Roche's region, and at the boundary of it there is like what is it? Asteroids are there. Like they are continuously tugging between Jupiter and Sun, so they are not able to combine itself, etc. But yeah, with the stars also this thing happens. And now imagine a star is not a solid thing, right? It is a full ball of plasma, completely ball of plasma. So, and it is similar, and ball of plasma, it's it's magnetic. It is simple, like imagine if there is a star and you bring the biggest, like for example a magnet as the size of our sun, and you bring it closer, so it will start to distort that star. It's a good assumption, it's a good analogy, you can take it. Nothing happens like that, of course. But now, because of, let's say, a very massive star and an active star, and there is another active star, if these are very close together, the gravity will start to deform them. And after a point, Of course, they're also orbiting each other. They're also rotating at their axis. And after a point when their orbits are very close, a phenomena will happen. Okay, a phenomena will happen. A phenomena where a mass transfer will take place between two stars. A mass transfer, for example, let's say from a massive star to less massive star, the mass transfer will take place. Mass will start to fall in this star, and this star will gets bigger, and this star will become smaller. And this is also known as algol paradox, because we observed such a system where a simple star is massive, which is not coming according to the laws of stellar evolution, but it is still there. So this kind of things happen. Now, if we are able to study these phenomena, if we are not, there is a definitely does not be any way we can generate these things in a lab, not anyway. But they are already there. We just need to good tools to observe them. We just need good, good measurement techniques, good observational techniques to observe them. And if we are able to observe them, astrophysicists can actually learn where physics breaks apart, or physics is still there, physics is holding there, or many different things. And of course, that's why eclipsing binaries, especially, or I can say normal binary stars, but not stars, later stage ones, stellar corpses. For example, a neutron star, like two neutron stars orbiting each other, they test general relativity. And there is a system, I don't remember its name. There's a system which has a orbit period of around 6.91 minutes approximately. To it's I guess it's a white dwarf and a neutron star, and that system is rotating at a good, orbiting each other at a good pace, 6.9 minutes. For example, one orbit is completed in 6.9 minutes. It's very fast. So, but after a while, oh sorry, yeah, the white dwarf and the neutron star. Now they are orbiting at a such pace, therefore they are giving off a good gravitational waves. But the gravitational waves so low, we are not able to right now test it. Our instruments are not able to right now receive it. But the proposed instruments, for example, the space-based like or other systems, we are aiming to achieve the sensitivity to at least to that system. So, for example, let's say we create a space-based LIGO and we need to test it, right? We need a good system which is giving that gravitational wave at that sensitive frequency. We need to test. So that system can be used as a tester. Like, okay, are we able to receive anything from that, or like we have some problem here in our system? Many applications where binary stars are used. And of course, because there are two, three of all the stars in multiple systems, we can have a good statistical analysis of how many stars in the universes, for example, have five solar masses, or how many stars, for example, have, have closed binary system. For example, eccentricity less than 0.1, or how many stars are there which have active, for example, have cataclysmic variables, etc. So these things can be estimated about using binary stars about the universe. So, oh yeah, of course. This there are some real pictures like MISAR. These big pictures are taken from astropixels.com. Uh, this is the MISAR system, which is a visual binary. A visual binary is a system where you can resolve the two stars. They are in a binary system, but they are basically resolved. We can easily see them apart. But if you see these two stars, these are technically not appearing as two stars together, but still there are two stars. For example, Sirius, the brightest star in our night sky, is a astrometric and spectroscopic binary. So astrometric in the sense, for example, you will see only one companion, and the other companion will be unseen. That can be due to because of the brightness of that first star, and we know Sirius is very bright. The other companion, of course, it will outshine the other companions. But if you observe it for some, good amount of time, so you will see like C is going like something like that. It is following some path, a wobbling path. So we can say, okay, it is a binary system. And of course, if you do it spectroscopy, uh, so you will observe like there is one spectra of one star, and there is spectra of another star, and they are basically shifting with each other like at a rest frequency. And there is Algol, which is in Perseus. It's a semi-detached eclipsing binary. And by semi-detached or detached, I mean like these stars are not like very far apart. They are like very close, and one of the massive star is like in a teardrop shape, like that. So these are known as semi-detached eclipsing binaries. And Algol is one of the first eclipsing binary star which was observed, which was discovered, and it was discovered and it was given a name of demon star because earlier what happened, like we used to say ना like अपने कहावत है कि ज़्यादा वेला है, स्पेशली पंजाब में ज़्यादा वेला है तो तारे गिन ले. तो Hipparchus actually sat one night and started cataloging all the stars, like every star which he can visually see with his eyes. So he started cataloging the stars. Okay, this one is this bright. Okay, this one is this bright. This one is very red. So he started cataloging the stars according to their brightnesses. And he observed Algol. For example, let's say he observed Algol and put it on 3 number. Okay, this is very bright. Okay, I put it in 3 number. After some 2-3 days later, he again observed Algol or the stars around it, and he again observed Algol, and he saw, okay, this star has it is brightness is reduced. Oh, why? So he shifted, he scratched its name from the third position and shifted it down. But again, after some days later, he saw, okay, this is bright again. So this is behaving like something weirdly, and hence it was given name of demon star, like in the constellation of Perseus, like as a head of Medusa, kind of that. So let's move forward. Okay. So as I said, there are types: visual binary, astrometric binary, spectroscopic, and eclipsing binary. These types are basically on the basis of how we observe them. Visual binary we can easily see like resolved stars. Astrometric we see like it's wobbling. Spectroscopic we see it using the spectra of the stars. And eclipsing we see using the light source. And if you see here is the Alpha Centauri system, you can see there is Alpha Centauri A at the center here. It's a relative orbit, and this is the path given. Like there's the ephemeris given of it like for several years. For example, like right now 21 days there, so it's like there. After 5 years, it will come here. After 5 here, like after 5 here, and it will go on like again and again, like that. And yeah, Alpha Centauri has a period of 17.92 years. So whooping 80 years. Imagine. But yeah, the thing with Alpha Centauri is like its period is large and therefore its eccentricity is also large. So there has been many research done where a good estimation of period and the relation of period and eccentricity has been found out. And it is generally said like if the period is larger, the eccentricity is also larger. And here's a good pick of spectroscopic binaries from Caltech. So if you see like if the stars are like here, you will see like there's two spectra like that. But at the point when they're like when they're moving tangentially, where their velocity vectors are tangentially as with respect to Earth, with respect to the observer, we will see only just one line, well, like one single line, and after some time we will see again two lines after one line, and this goes on and on and on, etc. And if we able to plot the radial velocity, the velocity we can see radially, so this will be something like that. And this gives a very good estimates. This gives the estimates of period. This gives the estimates of a sine I, which is basically semi-major axis into the sine of orbital inclination. This gives us again the estimation of k, which is semi amplitude, and many other things. And here's a good demonstration of series, like of astrometric binary, like how it goes. Like we only see a visual member and wobbling around its center of mass, and we see some unseen companion. There is like some unseen companion, and like series. This is the case of series A and B, kind of that. Okay. Now, my specialization is eclipsing binary, so I will show you a nice video of it, like how actually we observe them. So when we observe the brightness, what we see is a light curve. A light curve is a curve of brightness versus time. When a brighter star like comes transits the Earth, it has a less depth. But when bigger star or brighter star goes behind a dimmer star, we observe a very greater. And using these durations, these dips, we estimate the parameters. For example, the fractional radii, which is basically normalized radii with respect to the semi-major axis. We estimate period. We estimate other things such as eccentricity and omega. The systems are elliptical. We also estimate orbital inclination. And yeah, okay. Oh, sorry, wait. Yeah. So, eclipsing binaries. Eclipsing binary is the most useful binary system, and I will later on I will show you a table why it is known as most useful binary system. And eclipsing binaries are, you can say, just like a spectroscopic binary, a closed binary, a binary system of which we cannot resolve. Like we can just see one star, like one star, but it's actually two. And the same case happens with spectroscopic binaries. But the twist is that the system is inclined to the plane approximately 90 degrees. And that's why we are able to see the eclipses of the stars, basically. And if you see here, so you will see like if there are the two stars are like here, we will see just like around a straight line. And if we say this is a normalized brightness, so this is going to be at one. But let's say if the dimmer star comes ahead of a brighter star, or let's say if the brighter star goes behind the dimmer star, we see the primary eclipse where we see the maximum depth in the light curve. And again it will come around, we will see a straight line. And let's say if the brighter star is ahead and the dimmer star goes behind, or let's say the brighter star goes like comes in front, we will see less depth. And this process goes on and on and on and on. And if we just have difference, like if we just have a good for example, like this is plotted over this time. So if we, let's say, have, for example, first eclipse happened on, let's say, um, 6 a.m. and the another eclipse happened at let's say 2 p.m. So if we basically we minus that time, we get the difference. We will simply get the period. Like, okay, how much hours it is taking to repeat sorry the primary eclipse. And if you see closely, these are not flat. And earlier in the video I showed you this thing was kind of flat, but in this these are not actually flat. Some curve is there, and that curve is because of the limb darkening. Limb darkening is basically like if there is a star, but it is not like uniformly bright. Like if if we pinpoint, so let's say the brightness will is like some value of here, and at the end will be the same value of here. Ideally it should be, but it doesn't. And that is due to basic reasons, etc. But so basically what happens from the center, if you go towards the edge, it will go on decreasing. The brightness will go on decreasing, and this is known as limb darkening. So it is the limb of the star is basically darkened, and therefore that's why the brightness will goes like this and this, etc. And here I found a very nice photo here in the book of Hoffman, like of enhanced circles. Mostly we have in this age where we have good cameras and etc. And we go on have the pics of star trails, etc. But in the star trails, when we are opening the shutter of the camera for such a long time that the stars are moving, someone observed it, a system like a part of sky like that, and he observed like if you focus it here, like the star has some brightness here. It was going, and it dimmed. It dimmed, and it is bright again. And this is like just around some. It has just some minutes of like this eclipse, but this is the where a total eclipse happened between binary stars. So this is beautifully shown here, and this is for the system NN Serpens. Yeah, as we were saying, eclipsing binaries are studied using light curves, the systems. They are the very good distance estimators, and actually so good that they give the accuracy level of 5%, like under the 5% accuracy. Like they're around 95% accurate, or let's say 98% accurate. Another thing which we can have from the light curves is we can study the stellar atmosphere, the corona of other stars, and that actually happens in this transit region, like where the limb darkening is happening. We are able to see, we can estimate what is actually happening, like if is there some flare, something like that, or there's some another event at the surface of the star, and we will be able to see in that light curve, provided the light curve is much better resolved. It's very resolved on the time. Also, using light curves and some other techniques, for example, if we observe them in polarized way, or let's say using some interferometer, we will be able to see the seismological effects on star. Basically, we will be able to study the astroseismology, and which is the key understanding to stellar structures. So if you go on Wikipedia and have like search some series, etc., so they will give a good description like what at its core, where it's mental, etc. And Sanderson estimated using all these things, using astroseismology and other ways. So binary eclipsing binaries also gives a very good results in it. Now, complications, of course. Our life is not simple. Ideal cases are just maths. So we have very wide range of complications when it comes to eclipsing binaries. First complication is elliptical orbits, the very first complication, because now this is not circular. I cannot just simply use my FG1, GM1 M2 by R square equals to MV square by R relation. I need to consider the elliptical orbit part, the every time changing radius vector, or say distance vector, etc., position vector, every time changing, and it will be some inclined again. It had some different parameters. So one of the first complication is elliptical orbits. Another complication, photometric variations. And the photometric variations are variations which are caused by some photometric phenomena. For example, limb darkening. Limb darkening is a photometric phenomenon. There are things like that: gravity darkening, lensing, ellipsoidal modulations, etc. Many different reflections. Many things. Reflection is a very interesting thing, because let's say if there is a very hot star and there's a somewhat less star, or you can say there is a very luminous star and there is some less luminous star. So and they're close together, so we will be able to see up, like when the star is like going, so we'll see it's the starlight from the brighter star on the reflection from the on the dimmer star. So this patch will be a little less little bright as compared to the whole star. So it also gives some problems with the light curves and ellipsoidal modulation. I will tell you how. Okay, so this is the general idea what I was talking about. And if you see in the first, like here, like there is just a triangular dips, and this happens when there is a partial eclipse. Partial eclipse, for example, let's say the star is here and another star is here, but it's not completely at 90 degrees. Okay, uh, internet connection is stable. Okay, am I able to still share, like my telecast is clear? Can anyone confirm?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
it is clear.
Okay, okay, cool. Okay, sorry. So, okay. So let's say if the star is not completely inclined like at the 90 degrees, it's like let's somewhat upper, or somewhat niche, somewhat below. So let's say the eye, the angle of inclination is completely not 90 degrees. So what will happen? The star will come and goes, comes and goes. It will not remain like for a longer time at like in the front of the bigger star. Let's say. So it will give us just a dip, for example, just a simple dip. We are not able to study the transit time. So, and that therefore partial eclipses or partial eclipsing systems gives us less amount of data as compared to total eclipsing systems, because in total eclipsing system the star is for a longer time, like in the front of the other star, so we have good time to estimate the transit parameters, etc. Now, tidal distortion. This is because, let's say, the star, yeah, as I said, this star is much massive as compared to this star, and or much denser. So its gravity will, affect this star's shape, and it will give it, let's say, some teardrop shape. So it will give us like something like this curve, and this is completely different from what a light curve used to look like. So yeah, we need to deal with these kind of things also. And as I said about ellipsoidal modulation, our star, for example, rotates around its axis, right? The rotation is of some days. But let's say another star is rotating, a star which is we are observing, and it is rotating around its axis. And let's say it is rotating so fast that it is not able to hold its spherical shape. It becomes an ellipsoid, and that's what causes another parameter. And for example, like here, if you see, it gives a more curve to the straight line. Let's say, for example, if this is our expected light curve, ideal light curve. Let's say the star is very bright, so it gives us a reflection part, so it will change like this, the curve will change like this. Now it is now with reflection, it is now ellipsoidal. So the peak from the like the path from primary to secondary, it will increase a little bit again. And lensing is interesting again, because in lensing what happens, let's say the star is very massive and the other star is here, and let's say transits, and because of its massiveness and because of the gravity, the light bends around it, gravitational lensing, so it again distorts the light curve. And then beaming, Doppler beaming, there's another specific term for the photometric radiation, and it again has some effects. And after that we have this type of curve. And actually, astronomers or astrophysicists need to analyze these real curves instead of this simple curve. And of course, there are of course these type of curves also, and I specifically like to analyze them. They give good results. But yeah, these are the real things. Now, uh, okay, okay. Is this okay? Is the top of the part available? Are you able? Are you guys able to read everyone, and can anyone confirm?
Yes.
Or like, are you okay? The whole slide is visible, right? Completely. Okay. So as I was saying, why eclipsing binaries are important. So now eclipsing binaries with spectroscopic aspects. Let's say we are able to study the radial velocity of both of the stars. They gives us like all these parameters. Like this is a complete list. Just one parameter they are not able to give, but apart from that they give every single parameter. And like there are various parameters: period, eccentricity, output peristalon, projected semi-major axis, true semi-major axis, etc. And in spectroscopic parameters like mass function, masses, density, fractional radii, like in size parameters, surface gravity, distance to the system, and also the radiative, like what is the effective temperature of the star, luminosity, etc. If you see, like the only other systems which are able to give that much estimates is like astrometric binary, but with also with RVs, like with RVs in the sense, but with radial velocity curves. For example, we are able to get the radial velocities of that system from the spectroscopy. So using all these, different methods, we have a little bit of parameters from somewhat from that. For example, with eclipsing binary, what you only get is a period, orbital inclination, fractional radii, just that. But and if it's an elliptical orbit, then somewhat eccentricity and omega. But apart from these, we don't have anything. Like for example, we don't have a semi-major axis. We don't have, for example, other factors. For example, we don't have mass functions. We don't have uh, mass ratios, etc. Now, this becomes a problem. So what we do as a better approach, we take the four parameters from the eclipsing binaries, we take the four parameters from scopic binaries, we merge them, and from that we take all the results. For example, the masses of the stars, the rotational velocities of the stars, the orbital distance of the stars, or same major axis, or or distance between them, the luminosities of the stars, and many other things, surface gravities, densities, etc. And that's why they are able to give such good results, such good description of the universe, as we are now able to point out, like, okay, this is the binary system, I can observe it in this way, I will get this parameter. And okay, what else I need, this is I specifically need. So now, let's say if you're an astronomer and you create a stellar theory, okay, this star like born at this time, like अभी पैदा हुआ और कुछ टाइम के बाद ऐसा ऐसा होना चाहिए. Now, to verify this, you will start looking up there. Okay, ऐसा कुछ सिस्टम है आसमान में, कोई दिख रहा है? अगर दिख रहा है तो क्या कर रहा है? अगर सच में कर रहा है तो मेरे रिजल्ट से कितना वेरिएशन है उसका? This is what actually astronomers do, and this is why studying binary stars is also important. Now, light curve analysis, and I think a couple of 4 to 5 minutes. I won't take much more time. So this is the part which I am doing at IIT Bombay, and for example, like my whole group is doing some part. One of the first part of my group is basically modeling the system. Like they are creating a algorithm, or basically a pipeline where you give the input parameters, for example, mass, luminosity, etc. And it will give you the light curve, like the light curve for that specific values, input parameters. My teammate has the work to analyze these light curves, not the light curves. Of course, those are synthetic light curves, but the light curves which we are observing. For example, the light curve like this is the light curve of V453 Cygni. So this is a specific star in the Cygnus constellation. So fitting, like for example, estimating the parameters of these light curves. For example, this is the system V453 Cygni, and what its parameters, what its properties, what is the mass of the stars, what is the radius of the stars, etc. So my teammate has this work, like we need to estimate this. Another has a visualization part where we visualize how they actually orbit with each other. Another has a contact system stuff. So my goes with light curve analysis, and this topic actually gave me a a real hard time. Now, basically, you can estimate the parameters from the light curve by two approaches: the approach of equations, and the approach of fitting the models. Now, the approach of equations is very fairly simple. We can even do it with a pencil and scale, but the problem is that it's limited. And it's limited because it only works for the systems which is orbital inclination of around 90 degrees, like 90 degree, 89, 85, not more than that. And eccentricity low, like less eccentricity, like less than 0.1, etc. So from the light curve itself, from the dips and the durations, we can easily estimate the fractional radii of the stars. Okay. So from the dips and the from the duration, we can easily get the fraction radii of the stars. And here is a very good equation which I got from Maxford from Keele University. So fractional radii, as I said, is the stellar radius divided by the semi-major axis of that system, and delta one here, the term is basically the duration of total. If you say, like it's like kind of a mean anomaly of the thing. Basically, the duration will be of course t4 minus t1, and let's say these are the points. So t1 will be this, t2 will be this, t3 will be this, and t4 will be this. So let's say if I minus, like if I have the difference of t4 and t1, I will get the duration of whole eclipse. Like for how many times like the whole star is like less dim, etc. And then the duration of totality. Totality in the sense when the star is completely in front of it, like it's not at the edge, etc. And there, for that, we have the term delta term. So, and so this is for the durations part. And here, the term epsilon, which is defined, it's basically a dip estimator. So I out is basically the complete I. For example, this is I one for the normalized flux section. So I out with the total intensity with the two stars, like when they're separated, etc. I transit. Transit means like this part where the star is transiting in the front of other star. The dim star is transiting in the front of other star. So that will be intensity of transit. Like at that time, what will be the fractional loss? And the eye eclipsing. Eye eclipsing means the brighter star is behind the dimmer star, and sorry, like this way. and for how much time it is there, etc. Or for, let's say, oh yeah, of course, if you're able to imagine, like if this is the brightest star and this is the dimmest star, let's say this goes at the back, only what we will be able to see like in front will be the brightness or the luminosity or the flux of this only single star. So you already get a good estimate of that. So for example, let's say if the normalized flux is like this, so we can say like, okay, around 0.848 etc, 0.845, we can say like, okay, that will be around normalized flux of that single star, like that one. So epsilon is like this and it's defined here. So using these equations, we can easily get the estimate of fractional radii. And let's say if I divide by R1 by R2, I will get a ratio of stellar radii, which is again helpful for the some other equations. And of course, the important point. Now, eclipsing binaries are able to give us the orbital inclination. This is not spectroscopic binaries cannot give that. So for example, if you observe a spectroscopic binary and try to estimate parameters from it, then you won't be able to estimate the complete parameter. For example, you cannot estimate the individual masses. What you can estimate, a minimum mass. A minimum mass means, for example, m1 into sine cube I. That will what you will be able to estimate. You won't be able to estimate the actual semi-major axis. What you will be able to estimate is the projected axis, like A into sine I. So on from spectroscopic binaries, only you can do that. But from the eclipsing binaries, what we get is an essential thing, which is orbital inclination. And using this equation, you can able to define the so you able to estimate the orbital inclination. And once we have the orbital inclination, we can put it into the sine function, and we can get the same major axis. Then we can have the individual masses, and from those things, and from the when we have A, we can able to estimate stellar radii. And now we have mass, we have stellar radii, we have surface temperatures from the photometry, we have same major axis. What else we need? We can easily model the system. We can easily estimate its surface gravity, its orbit, its various other factors. Now, move, move. Hmm. Yeah. For okay, so this thing was for circular orbits, like nearly circular orbit. But let's say if it has a good eccentricity, let's say some 0.15, etc. Okay. Yeah, I have written it. So there, what we try to estimate it using the Poincare elements. We try to estimate the eccentricity and omega using the Poincare elements. And like the elliptical orbits, like will like the system will look like something like this. And there is a synthetic light curve which will look like this. So if this has been a circular system, so if let's say the light curve, sorry, the occultation is happening at some, let's say some 0.1, then the transit should have happened at 0.6 definitely. So there should have been an symmetric gap between them. But elliptical systems doesn't allow that. Like for example, for this is for the 0.5 eccentricity, so they're like pretty far away. So if we have less eccentricity, they will come closer. Larger, they will go farther again. So using these estimation, oh, okay. Here is some new term which is known as phi, and there is not flux. Basically, it is phase, orbital phase. Orbital phase is nothing but, let's say you have some time. Let's say if we go behind, we see this thing. So T4 minus T1 divided by pi is the orbital phase. This is the formula for orbital phase. If we divided by pi, just to have some uh, estimate the radiance things and all, etc. Now here you see, if we have the orbital phase of, let's say for the secondary, let's say for the secondary minima, okay, this is some 0.9, and let's say this is some 0.1. So 0.9 minus 0.1 gives us 0.8 minus 0.5, etc. So this is give us e cos omega, and then using this function we can have e sin omega. We divide it, we get tan omega, and from that we can easily able to estimate what's the omega. And once we have omega, we are easily able to estimate the e, or basically you square the whole system and under root it. So it will give, just simply gives us e. And alpha here is basically r1 plus r2 divided by a into 1 minus e square. Of course, and approximately we can take it as a fractional radii because the e is like in square term. Like this will be, let's say if the e is like 0.1, so this will become 0.01. So minus that 0.9 or something like that, 999. So it is very less in it. So you can easily approximate it for the R1 and R2. But this is for the good estimation, and you can find it in the textbook of Köppen, 1979. And let's say if you don't want to do all this stuff and you just want good estimation of it, which we will see why we need that good estimation. But let's say we are able to do this, we can easily approximate sorry these equations like this, like pi by 2, pi secondary of minus 5 primary minus 0.5, and E sin omega is d here is duration of secondary duration of secondary eclipse minus duration of primary eclipse, and like that. Okay, as I said, this approach is limited. This approach is good for very specific system, but not for every system. And this approach does not incorporate the effects of limb darkening, the gravity darkening, other various phenomena. And hence we come to the approach of fitting. And this is most probably will be my last slide. Okay. Now, the approach of fitting is efficient and robust. And fitting in the sense, for example, let's say the fitting, we have already done fitting. Uh, every physics student, at least because I was a physics student, or every chemistry student, when we have these observation tables, when we plot the observations, and we see, okay, this is following some straight line. Okay, then we used to draw a straight line by, okay, 5 points are above, 5 points are below. Oh, this will be something like that. Okay, basically we do the fit of that curve. So approximate fit on that, like let's say we need to what is it, approximate the things, or let's say we need to know a value at a specific point. Then what will be the value? Like let's say at a specific time I need to know the brightness. So I only have, like let's say from of one day, but I need to know at the fifth day. I can easily do that by if I do the fitting. Now fitting has a bit of problem when it comes to eclipsing minus. Why? If you see those curves, okay, let me show the curves again. If you see these curves, this is not a straight line, first of all. Okay, this is not a Gaussian. This somehow goes towards the Gaussian thing, but still again it's not a complete Gaussian. So as estimations will be wrong. So this is, it isn't a Gaussian distribution. This isn't a this a little bit comes to the trapezoidal, but this is a synthetic curve. That's why it looks very beautiful. But let's say the first slide, this doesn't look at a good look a lot like a trapezoidal fitting. So you know now we have a problem. We don't have a good function to fit these. This is not, of course, not an exponential, not logarithmic. How to fit? So what actually scientists think, they created a model. A model, let's say, for example, let's create a model. We have two stars, okay? These are spherical stars, okay? So no ellipsoids, no deformed shape. Let's take a good approximation of it. And let's say these stars are closed system. Let's say has eccentricity less than 0.2. This has some range of period, that it can only have this range of period. Okay, and let's incorporate some limb darkening, and we have a good model. A similar model was given by Linson and Davis, which is known as ND model. And okay, we have a model, we have a function in function where we put time, and we get a value of flux, or let's say magnitude of brightness, anything in the terms of intensity of light. So let's say I put to some time, it gave me that. Another time it gave me that. Or let's say I put an orbital phase, it gave me that incorporated brightness of that point. And I do that, and plot. Okay, so I have the light curve, and then I will fit that light. I will try to fit that light curve into my observations. Let's say I have the points, and I will try to superimpose that curve on that. And then I will see. Okay, this is a little bit shifted. Okay, I need to increase, let's say, period or something like that. Let's say I need to increase the argument of progesterone, and doing some this by that, we will be able to estimate a good fit where uh, what is it? it is appearing good enough that the line is following at approximately at the center of all those observed points. And how we will estimate if it's a good fit? And the answer is basically chi-square minimization or Monte Carlo Markov chain fitting. So chi-square is like there is a statistical. These are like all statistical methods. Like what you do basically, you take residuals. Let's say you have some observed value. Let's say I have plotted at time t. Let's say I have some value and I have some observed value. I will minus it. Okay, this has some difference. For another point, I will do that. I will do that. If the all the residuals have like approximately same differences, my fit is good. But let's say it's not. Okay, my fit is not good. Simple as that. So this is known as chi-square test of fitting. So basically, using statistical algorithms like chi-square minimization, what it does, we don't have to sit there and input every value by some decimal points to fit the curves. The algorithm will itself do that. Or the better part, or the better algorithm for this is Markov chain Monte Carlo fitting. What it does, it uses the Monte Carlo and Mark. So these are basically different techniques. It combines them together to have the fitting, to estimate the fittings, to reduce the residual differences, etc., and have a very good fit. And it gives us a really good counter plots of like how much is the error range here, how much is the error range here. Is it very shifted or is it good, etc. So these techniques are used by professional scientists when they fit the actual light curves to get how much are fitted parameter. Let's say if I observe a system and let's say actual value is let's say some 3.9 days period, its period value, but by fitting I had some 3.8. Of course, there is some difference, but I need to also know like on the basis of fitting, what is the error range of my data. I cannot exactly pinpoint and say like 3.8 is what I am getting. There will be some error range like okay 3.8 plus minus 0.2, etc., like that. So that will give me a good range to okay my period can lie here or there, etc. So that is also important. So yeah, working is something like that. We do that by obtaining and refining the data. Let's say if I have the system, let's say V453 Sydney, I will go to the MAST portal, the portal which handles the test satellite data, K2 Kepler satellite data. I will search the system. I will see, okay, these are the files. I will see the photometry file. I will download the FITS file using AstroPy, which is the Python package for astronomy. Using that, I will analyze the FITS file. I will take the what is it, the light curve data, basically time versus flux data. I will uh, plot it in the terms of orbital phase. I will see, okay, these are the things, okay, etc. Okay. So yeah, for the fitting, I need to estimate the for that I will first use approximate, then I will use a model, so it's ND model or Wilson-Debney model, and I will have input some way like I say guess values like some like this value like that value, and see if the fitting is there. Then I will apply chi-square minimization or Monte Carlo Markov chain MCMC, and I will see okay this like that. Okay, my the fit is now my good. Okay, and then I will get the obtain the actual parameters and the fitted light curve, and I will say okay this thing is what I'm getting from my model, and then we compare with others. Now there are some specific programs already created, like for example JKT-EBOP, which was first created by Popper and Netzel in 1981, but then it is now handled by Southworth. This is a professor from K University and has given many contributions to the binary systems like transiting exoplanets, eclipsing planets, and many more things. Now there is Phoebe, and yeah, the friends people will get the reference here. Yeah, Phoebe 2.2 is another system which can model the stellar atmospheres and various star spots, stellar spots, etc. Many things. So that is there also. ELLC. This is an AI operated what is it program. So it uses some machine learning techniques to fit the light curves, and there is some light curve program also just to have a good fit from like that. And this is the thing which I was telling you. This is the residuals observed minus calculated, and this shows like yeah mostly they are on the line. So this is a good fit, and this is the flux basically, the flux which is going like this way. So this is for the primary, this is for the secondary, and this is for this system taken from the torus paper. So this is how approach of fitting is, you know, taken place. Efficient, robust, have incorporates photometric variations, Roche's configurations, many more things. So by this, I would like to end this talk. I think I have already surpassed the time, but yeah, thank you. I think I can now take some questions.
Thank you, sir. Would you be comfortable reading them from the chat box or should I read them out, sir?
Yeah, sure. I can. I'll read them.
Great.
Okay. So the first question is from Abhishek Zala. Okay, Abhishek Da. Hello Da. So is it observed that in a binary star system, a main sequence star rips apart another sequence stars? Yeah, and those systems are known as cataclysmic variables. So, sometimes, okay, main sequence star rips only that if the main sequence star is very massive as compared to the another main sequence star. Let's say we have the HR diagram, and the first star is like something here, second star is something like here, like at the topmost above, and there and also required that the systems are close enough to have the gravity take place, like the effects of gravity take place. And if the star is rotating very fast, what will happen? A mass transfer will take place, and if there is some instability in the system, the another star which is more unstable, which is more energetic, it will basically what is it goes in a nova or a supernova, etc., and leaves a still corpse behind, something like a neutron star or a white dwarf. And that's how we observe white dwarf and neutron star pairs. This is from Chinchal Gododia. What's the difference between a star cluster and multiple star system? Okay, in the star cluster, what happens? Like all the stars has a multiple center of mass, and all they are gravitationally attached to that center of mass. But in a multiple star system, that cannot be a like. Okay, in star clusters, we also observe multiple star systems. Of course, like there is main common center of mass. There are all the stars, and like there is some system which is like binary that can possibly have. But like completely reverse or like completely vice versa doesn't applies for the multiple star system. A multiple star system, two stars just happily orbiting each other. For example, Alpha Centauri system, like Alpha Centauri A and Alpha Centauri B, like they happily orbits each other. So it does not have to be other stars have to come there. And if the if one of the binary stars explodes in a supernova, will other star grab the matter by supernova, or what will happen? That completely depends upon the energy. Most of the time, it won't, because in a supernova, the explosion is so massive, so much energetic, all the thing is like shed out away. So this is a less likely chance, like that the like the other star system is like I say नेट लेके बैठे आजा 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 ये मेरा सारा नाश्ता, ऐसा नहीं होने वाला. But yeah, इससे पहले just before, what happens when there is just before a supernova, a mass transfer take place, as I said earlier. Like if the star grows a lot, or like a lot, for example, our sun, after some million years, it will expand in a red giant. Why? Because it will start using helium because all the hydrogen will be it will be consumed. So the mass is still same, but the volume is increasing, right? So, and the Roche's lobe, the Roche's radius is depends upon mass thing kind of thing, or upon mass. So technically what's happening is this star is just swelling up, swelling up, swelling up, swelling up, and when it will come towards, what do you say, uh, its Roche's radius, there's a possibility, if the other star is there, the the other systems, like all the swelled up, or like the outer layer, it will because of stellar winds and other activities, a part of that will start to go on towards another star. um, uh, I think I did a mistake by not including a cataclysmic variable diagram. But if you just simply search on Google, you will see like there is like infinity shape Roche's loops, two loops. One star is at like center of the one loop, another is there. If let's say the system swells up completely, it fills its Roche's law, and then and this is the near closer one, and this also starts to swelling up. What can happen due to energies and instabilities? This star will start to lose its mass to the other star, and another star will start to swell up. Like, and that's how we observe these stars by accretion disks, like stars having accretion disks. Now, black holes have accretion disks. We can easily take that part. We can easily take that part, but what happens there is, okay, all the things start to go up like there and all, etc. And this is quite unusual from the different parameters what we observe in the solar system, or not, sorry, solar system, in the universe. So we see accretion disk around a star, we get to know, okay, this is something weird is happening, and that is a cataclysmic variable type of category. Okay. Another question: what will we call when we find planets between two stars? Okay. I don't know if there's a specific name. Okay, if let's say these are two stars, there are two possibilities of having a planet. Let's say a planet orbiting just one star, or a planet orbiting the whole system. So I think the planet orbiting the one star is known as S-type exoplanets, and the orbiting the whole system is known as P-type exoplanets, like that. And yeah, we can observe, like let's say we have light curves. Sometimes there's a increase in the transit time, and that's where we estimate, like, okay, wow, a planet just crossed the sunspot, so it creates that blip there. Okay. Thank you, Bharti. Thanks for the video. Like binary stars, we find galaxies orbiting, but why don't we call them binary galaxies? Can we find asteroid belt between two stars? Okay. Of course, we can find an asteroid belt between two stars. Required, it has in the specific centered equation, centered point. Um, but it's very less likely, of course. Like binary stars, we find galaxies orbiting, but why don't we call them binary galaxies? Uh, I don't know if that type of you know term exists for two like binary galaxies, because I think what actually happens is with galaxies, everything, like the space is expanding, universe is expanding, so every single thing is going away from each other. So there is a less likely of two galaxies orbiting each other. That there's a possibility that, for example, large magnetic cloud orbiting our galaxy, but it's a stellar cloud kind of thing, like that, or just many stars, you know, remnant of a merged galaxies kind of thing. So I don't think so. If there is a term like binary galaxies or that. Okay, Praveen. As you said, two-thirds of the stars are binary or of a star system. Is it possible to the remaining one-third were a part of binary system in the past? Yes, there can be possibility. One possibility, but there can be less likely of possibility, because let's say these are two stars, and due to stellar revolution, let's say one star explodes in a supernova. But again, still there is something left behind, right? Something later, that can be anything, like, for example, not anything, but in the three things, that can be a black hole, that can be a neutron star, that can be a white dwarf. But after supernova, it won't just goes like that. What you're talking about can happen when there is a three body system. Let's say due to gravitational tug, there are two binary star system. Another one comes, like there are, for some, like for very very specific inputs or very very specific requirements. There are first three of them are together, but again, but then after that, the another will be thrown out from the system, and the system will go just like that, alone, some system alone in the sky, like that, stellar star. Okay, by Chancellor again, why gravitational waves are produced and not single stars? Okay, I didn't quite understand this thing. Gravitational waves are basically produced when there are very very massive stars. For example, two neutrons are like very very dense objects, compact stars, which we call them. or let's say there are black holes. Now, when they, they are so massive that if we see it around a space curve fabric, it bends the fabric uh, due to its gravity. But now, let's say, just imagine like this is your, like, cloth. You have a cloth, and like you put a object, it bends it. But and let's say you have a system where like you have two balls and you join it with a stick, and you give it a spin there in the fabric, so in your like some chadar or something like that. So you will see that there are some ripples are creating. Basically, what is happening due to the fast spinning of orbiting of those stars, like around each other, they sends out ripples in the space-time curve, and that's how gravitational waves are produced. And not single star. I think your question was why gravitation are produced by binary and not by single stars. Is it right? Okay. Uh, a
Yes,
single star
sir.
basically. Okay. Basically, a single star cannot orbit around itself, or there needs to be some what do you say, some companion along with it can orbit or it can move in the space and fabric, and that's the only way gravity can be produced by binary stars. Eventually, if we put a smaller than the or will one of the stars pull it? Will its relative velocity stay zero with respect to binary star? This is a very nice question. This is a question which an HA, like and a completely HA student will ask. Like, what will happen at the central point, like where this is center of mass? That will depend upon the star, like third object. Let's say the third object is minute. There's a possibility that it will stay there. But let's say the object is, let's say, quite big, like a little bit big. There's a possibility due to stellar activity and all, etc. It will start to feel a tug between those two. And let's say if the two stars are very massive, there's a very good possibility it will rip apart. Uh, that can be a possibility. But yeah, that depends upon many various other dependent factors. Okay, will its relative velocity is zero with respect to the binary stars? Yeah, let's assume that we put an object there between at the very center of the two stars, and we did not it did not rip apart itself or flown away. It's there, so it will stay the same. Like its velocity will stay zero with respect to the binary stars, but it depends upon how are you saying the relative velocity. For example, if we are observing, so we will see the star moving like that. Like for example, okay, let me go to this slide. Okay. Like in this like in the astrometric binary session astrometric binary picture, if we let's say this is the path of first star, this is the path of second star, and this is the path of the center of mass. So if there is a third object like something like that, so we will observe it going on and on and on like that. And with respect to these objects which are moving, we will see, okay, this is pretty much moving in a straight line. So yeah, with respect to that, it has a zero relative velocity. Yeah. Okay. Let's consider a black widow pulsar. Oh wow, what a name! This is by Ruchira Mikhail. Encounters a magnetar. Which one will disintegrate first? I don't know. This is a very exotic question in itself. I don't know basically what will happen. Black widow star. I like heard this term at the first time. And magnetars. Yeah, magnetars are basically neutron stars, but they have very strong radiance, much stronger than a normal pulsar. So I don't know what will happen. It will completely depend upon what's their configuration is, what their density is, like which one is more denser and which one is less denser. Let's say if the one is less denser will have the possibility of disintegrating first, but I don't think so. It will disintegrate because magnetar is a kind of a pulsar also, and the black widow pulsar is also pulsar. Most probably, what will happen? their orbits will start degrading. Their period will start reducing, and after some period of years or million years, they will just boom. What to say? I'm not getting that word. They will just simply collide with each other. A collapse will happen. Okay, in the okay, this is by Samir Hone. In the zombie star theory, okay, zombie star. Okay, I'm really learning a lot of new things. Yeah. Why does a white dwarf star absorbs matter from its binary? Okay, like a vampire star, like the cataclysmic variable star. Why does absorb matter from its binary? See, what happens is white dwarf is a kind of a remnant, but the other star needs to be in the like zombie star theory. The other star needs to be quite massive and unstable. So once it fills its Roche's lobe, it's because of the gravitational boundaries of the set it from due to the other star. What will happen once a quite lot of mass starts overflowing from its boundary? What will happen that the gravity of the other star will starts to pull it, and that's how it will goes on pulling it, and all the matter will start forming on it, etc. So that kind of how like zombies or vampire star theory like kind of happens. It basically overflows from the gravitational boundary. Can there be planetary system to find stars? Of course there can be. We found a lot of things. For example, Alpha Centauri has a kind of thing, and if I'm not wrong, wait, I think yeah, the system which I showed you, uh, like this Kepler 16 NASA, this also has an what is it, exoplanet, and at a very good inclination, at approximately 90-degree inclination. Okay. So yeah, this has thing, and there are some other systems which have planetary systems, etc. And let's say if uh, I don't know why, but yeah, why it happened, but yeah, let's say Jupiter hasn't been a star, sorry, it hasn't been a planet, it has become the star. So the debris between like Jupiter and Sun will eventually form a planet. So yeah, we can have these type of systems. We can have these type of things. Okay, this is where Samir again. Can a black hole and a star cooperate like a binary system? Of course it can, and after some while, black hole will, if the star is close by, what is it? The black hole will uh, suck up all the matter from the star, and the star will be there no more. But yeah, of course that can be a possibility, and that possibility has been beautifully shown. No, no, not there. Okay, sorry, not there. But yeah, there can be that possibility. I was going to refer Interstellar, but yeah, in Interstellar there were planets actually orbiting the black hole. Yeah, that can be a good possibility. That can happen, of course. Okay.
We've got one
Okay.
more question um,
Yeah.
from Chanchal. How do white dwarfs, neutron stars, pulsars, and magnetars die?
Okay. I don't know about the neutron stars, but I know about the like okay, pulsars and magnetars are basically neutron stars. Pulsar is the spinning one. Magnetar is also again the spinning one, but they have very great magnetic fields. And I don't know what the neutron stars quite specifically, but I know what the like white dwarfs. So what happens with white dwarfs? Like they will start, as like there is very less thing available with them. They will start to dim, and maybe after some time it will just using all those things, or because of stellar winds, etc. It will give away everything. Basically, it will kind of evaporate kind of thing. But I didn't know like that is what actually happens there, but that can be a possibility. That most probable possibility can be like that. Yeah. Okay. So any other questions?
I think that's the lot. Thank you so much, sir. I'd like to invite Mazam to share his thoughts. Thank you.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah. Yeah. Go.
Good evening to one and all. Today, I, Chef Mozam from CUAP Science Club, deem it a great honor to propose the vote of thanks to all who have helped us in making this webinar such a great success. First and foremost, I would like to express my gratitude to our speaker for gracing us with his presence. Thank you, sir, for such interesting and thought-provoking address, and also for making excellent presentation and making this seminar informative and inspiring. Thank you, sir, for clearing our doubts. I'm glad to express my appreciation to our club members who arranged such a wonderful session for knowledge seekers like us. Last but not the least, the wonderful audience whose presence in such a great number made this session a success, not only from our college but also from other colleges. Thank you very much for your kind cooperation. Once again, I thank you all for your cordial support. Thank you.
Thank you.